January 1678, a woman named Isabel Young stood chained to a stone church wall in the heart of Scotland, an iron collar locked around her throat. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Her legs barely held her weight after 18 hours of standing, and as the winter night descended and her neighbors passed by on their way home from market, some averted their eyes while others stared with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. Isabel's crime was not theft. It was not violence. It was not even what we would recognize today as a crime at all. She had argued that feeding starving children mattered more than strict observance of the Sabbath. For that opinion, for those words spoken in defense of the hungry, the same church leaders who preached mercy from their pulpits on Sunday morning had locked that 15-pound iron collar around her neck on Monday afternoon. And Isabel was just one woman, just one name among an estimated 10,000 Scottish women who would endure this particular form of torture between the years 1500 and 1800. The device was called the joug, and it still hangs in churches across Scotland today. You can see them if you visit. You can touch the cold iron. You can read the names of some of the women who wore them, engraved on plaques as if they were honored guests rather than victims. What you're about to hear is a story that historians have downplayed and sanitized for 3 centuries, a story of systematic oppression disguised as godly justice, a story of women punished not for breaking laws, but for having voices. And if you want to uncover more hidden histories that never made it into your textbook, stories that reveal the uncomfortable truths about how power has always worked, then subscribe right now, because this channel is dedicated to bringing these buried narratives into the light. The joug was not reserved for criminals or traitors. It was designed specifically for what the Kirk Sessions, the powerful Scottish church courts, called moral crimes. And when you examine the records preserved in the National Museum of Scotland, a disturbing pattern emerges immediately. 90% of the people punished for scolding, for fighting, for gossip, for possessing what the church called a loose tongue, were women. When men engaged in heated public arguments in the streets or marketplaces, the Kirk Sessions recorded these incidents as passionate debate or vigorous discussion and sent the men home without consequence. But when women did the exact same thing, spoke with the exact same volume and intensity about the exact same topics, the church called it a crime. The punishment was public humiliation and physical torture, carried out in front of entire communities, designed not just to punish one woman, but to send a message to every other woman watching. The joug itself was deceptively simple in design, but devastatingly effective in practice. Picture a circle of solid iron weighing between 10 and 15 pounds, hinged on one side and secured with a heavy padlock on the other. The interior diameter was just wide enough to fit around a human neck, but never comfortably, never with room to breathe easily or turn your head without the metal biting into your skin. That collar connected to a chain, sometimes only 2 feet long, sometimes 4 if the Kirk Session felt merciful that day. The chain anchored to an iron ring embedded directly into the church wall or the town market cross, positioned at eye level so that every person who walked past would stare directly into the face of the woman being punished. You could not sit down. You could not lie down to rest even for a moment. You could not lean against the wall for support because the weight of the collar pulled your head forward while the shortness of the chain jerked you backward. Within the first hour, the muscles in your neck began to scream. Within 2 hours, your shoulders felt like they were on fire. By the 3rd hour, your legs shook so badly you thought they might give out entirely, but you had to keep standing because there was no other option. Many churches positioned these collars directly beside the main entrance, which meant that every Sunday, the entire congregation filed past the woman in the joug on their way to worship. Some churches even added small bells to the collar, bells that rang with every tiny movement, every attempt to shift position, every involuntary shudder, announcing the woman's presence and her shame to everyone within earshot. And if you were unlucky enough to be collared during winter, like Isabel Young, you weren't just enduring discomfort and humiliation. You were fighting for your life against hypothermia and frostbite. your body slowly shutting down while the godly people of your community walked past and did nothing. The specific crimes that landed women in the joug reveal everything you need to know about what this punishment was really designed to do. In Aberdeen in 1611, a woman named Margaret Leslie was locked in iron for 6 hours. Her offense: sharp words with her husband in the street. That was the entire charge. She had argued with her spouse where other people could hear them. No violence, no threats, just a verbal disagreement that happened to be public. When men argued with their wives in the street, the Kirk session sent them home. When Margaret did it, they chained her to a wall. In Stirling in 1590, Bessie Aitken was collared for scolding the minister's wife about poor relief. Let me translate what that actually means. Bessie had criticized how the church was distributing charity to impoverished families in the community. She believed the system was unfair. She believed people were being overlooked. She said so out loud. The church responded by locking her in the joug. In Edinburgh in 1623, a woman named Christian Laurie spent 3 days in iron, removed only for Sunday service, and then immediately chained back up. Her crime: saying that the merchant's wife had bought cloth from traveling tinkers. This statement was true. The merchant's wife had indeed purchased fabric from traveling salesmen, but it embarrassed a wealthy family, and that embarrassment was enough to warrant 3 days of torture. In Glasgow in 1634, 2 women got into a fight over access to well water, a precious resource in a time of scarcity. The Kirk session collared both women at the same time, positioned facing each other, forced to stand for 8 hours staring at each other's suffering and humiliation. Do you see the pattern taking shape? These women were not punished for volume or rudeness or disruption. They were punished for disagreeing with husbands, for criticizing authority figures, for embarrassing wealthy families, for fighting over resources, for having opinions about how their communities should function. Professor Louise Yeoman, who has spent years analyzing hundreds of Kirk session records, discovered that 70% of school charges involved women criticizing church leaders or civic officials. This was never about keeping the peace or maintaining order. This was about keeping women powerless and silent. But perhaps the most absurd example happened in Perth in 1605. A woman whose name was not even deemed important enough to record was collared for 2 hours because she laughed too loudly during market day. The male witness who reported her testified, and this is a direct quote from the Kirk session records, that her laughter disturbed the peace and dignity of godly commerce. She laughed too loud while people were shopping, and for that she spent 2 hours locked in iron, her neck aching, her dignity stripped away, all because her joy was too audible for male comfort. But not every woman accepted this punishment quietly. Helen Guthrie in 1661 had a neighbor steal her hen, and in a time when a single chicken could mean the difference between eating and starving, that theft mattered desperately. Helen accused her neighbor publicly. The Kirk session collared her for 12 hours on market day as punishment for making the accusation. And here is the detail that should make your blood boil. Later, the neighbor confessed to stealing the hen. Helen had been telling the truth. The Kirk session's response was not an apology, not compensation, not even acknowledgement of their mistake. Instead, they wrote this note in their records: better 10 honest women shamed than 1 guilty go free. They would rather torture 10 innocent women than risk 1 guilty person escaping punishment. And then there was Isabel Young, whose story I began with. Confirm, 1678, January. Isabel argued with another woman about Sabbath observance. The other woman insisted that no work could be done on Sunday, ever, for any reason, no exceptions. Isabel argued that feeding starving children was more important than strict Sabbath rules, that surely a merciful God would understand the difference between unnecessary labor and life-saving compassion. The Kirk session sided with the strict interpretation and sentenced Isabel to 24 hours in the joug overnight in the depths of January. Think carefully about what that means. Scotland in the dead of winter, temperatures well below freezing. Isabel standing outside all day, all through the freezing night, and all through the next day. The iron collar conducting cold directly into her body like a conductor of suffering. No shelter, no warmth, no relief. She survived, but barely. The Dunfermline Abbey records include a medical notation. Isabel Young lost 3 toes to frostbite. For the rest of her life, every step she took reminded her of the price she paid for having an opinion about religion and mercy. The jougs may no longer hang around women's necks in Scotland, but the impulse that created them, the desperate need to control women's voices and punish them for speaking, that impulse never fully disappeared. It simply evolved, finding new forms and new justifications in every generation. When a woman speaks up in a meeting today and gets told she's being too aggressive, when a woman posts an opinion online and receives threats, when a woman reports wrongdoing and gets labeled as difficult, the goal remains the same. Silence her, control her, make her afraid to speak again. Thousands of women had their voices stolen by iron and fear. Their names are mostly lost to history now, erased like those scratch marks some desperate woman left inside a collar at Duddingston Kirk as she tried to claw her way free. But their suffering matters, their resistance matters, and remembering what was done to them matters. So here's my question for you. What would you have been collared for in 1600 Scotland? Disagreeing with your boss, defending a friend, speaking your mind, laughing too loudly? Drop your answer in the comments below, because their voices were silenced, but yours doesn't have to be.